So we're off to Buenos Aires for the first of the 15 races planned for 1973. It was the end of January and a huge Formula One circus was starting a new season. In the paddock, a prestigious guest, Juan Manuel Fangio. The pole position had been taken not by Emerson Fittipaldi in his Black Lotus, but by Clay Regazzoni in his BRM. The Swiss driver managed to hold on to his advantage for the first corner in front of Francois Cevert, which shot forward from the second line. So began the new season with Regazzoni as its first leader. A nice start for Rega, who'd been dropped by Ferrari at the last moment and who, what's more, had refused an offer from Brabham. Without BRM, he would have been without a car. Behind him, though, the threat from Fittipaldi was becoming more obvious. The Brazilian was third, hassling Cevert, whilst his new teammate, Ronnie Peterson, was just behind. Stewart, after a bad start, was a bit further back. During the 29th lap, a change of leader. Cevert was in the lead. Regazzoni's tyres were wearing badly. Over at Tyrrell, they were optimistic. Cevert was now firm leader. Better still, Stewart had climbed back into second place. Well, they hadn't counted on the devilish Fittipaldi, who didn't let up the pressure and kept up with the rhythm of the Tyrrell Fords. Fittipaldi now second, Stewart having problems. As a result, Cevert had to fight heroically to resist the Lotus. The Frenchman had a cramp in his right leg. During the 86th lap, there was another change. Fittipaldi getting past the Tyrrells. Fittipaldi masterly coming home in front of Cevert, Stewart, Ickx, Hume and Wilson Fittipaldi. Well, Cevert saying it was a very, very tough race, high pressure. There was never more than a 3-second gap between the leaders over 96 laps. A real race, he says.
It was a hard race, a very good race, you know, and Emerson drove very well, as did Francois. He drove an excellent race. I'm just sorry I couldn't be more opposition. Whose is this?
Well, I have to admit that Buenos Aires was nothing more than an observation round. 2 weeks later, we're in Sao Paulo. Brazilians organising a Grand Prix that counted towards the World Drivers' Championship for the first time. Well, no doubt Tyrrell had the most balanced team. But in the hot and electrifying atmosphere, the crowd had eyes only for their idol, Emerson Fittipaldi. He was second on the starting grid, having been beaten by his very rapid teammate, Peterson. So off they go, 40 laps of the long-lasting Interlagos circuit, adding up to 7,960 kilometres. Well, the Brazilians were jubilant. Fittipaldi was in the lead in front of the other local driver, Carlos Pace. He'd shot forward from the third line. Stewart and Peterson were following behind. Cevert only 8th. Very soon, Pace had let Stewart and Peterson past. Well, Surtees' driver was already struggling with his tyres. The duel between Stewart and Peterson for second place was a stunner, but it didn't last. The Swedes gave in during the 6th lap. That left the positions well established with Fittipaldi in front, Stewart second, then Ickx with his Ferrari, Beltoise in the BRM and Hume in McLaren. Cevert, who was having problems with his shock absorbers, already a lap down. Nothing seemed able to stop the triumphant march of the number one, who was making light work of the traps on the circuit. Amongst those who had to abandon, Wilson Fittipaldi and Jean-Pierre Beltoise, whilst Regazzoni had to stop and change his front tyres. During the 30 laps, Fittipaldi's lead over Stewart increased to 13 seconds. The race had effectively already been run. The Brazilian only had to conserve his leads and beware of traffic. to come home winner. Sever stopped during the 32nd lap to change a wheel. He was 2 laps behind and wouldn't mark any points this time. Hume and Arturo Nazario in the Ferrari were 3rd and 4th. On the track, made slippery by dust and heat, the Lotus had nothing more to fear. During the off-season, Lotus had changed from Firestone tyres to Goodyear, and it seemed to be a good choice. At the finish, Colin Chapman threw his cap into the air as Fittipaldi took his 2nd consecutive victory in front of Stewart, Hume, Nazario, Ickx and Regazzoni. It was obviously a great welcome and already had a good lead in the championship, 8 points in front of Stewart. Battle was declared between the 2 men for the rest of the season. The 3rd round took place 4 weeks later in Kyalami in South Africa. The circuit, as you all know, is situated at an altitude of 2,200 metres. This Grand Prix saw the first appearance of the new brand, Shadow, with a car driven by the American George Follmer. And the new McLaren also showing its face. At Tyrrell, well, they got the message. They're trying to improve their performance. Constant dialogue between Sever and Stewart.
I haven't gained or lost very much, but it's unstable on the straight.
During the practice, Jackie Stewart had a serious accident. The cause was a fault in the brake circuit. With no second car, the Scotsman has to start from the outside of the 7th row at the wheel of Sever's car. He, in his turn, has inherited Stewart's car that had been patched up as best they could. Far from ideal situation. Worth noting as well that pole position for this South African Grand Prix was taken by Dennis Hume with the new McLaren. Well, this remarkably was the only pole position in the 1967 World Champions' career. Hume managed to hang on to the advantage to the first corner, just in front of the other McLaren driven by Scheckter. Fittipaldi was 3rd, Revson 4th, Peterson 5th, followed by Reutemann and the local Dave Charlton. Stewart, though, beginning to climb back up. The placings remained more or less stable until the 3rd lap, when Regazzoni had an accident at the Crowthorne corner. The Swiss driver had been unable to avoid Charlton and been hit by Helwood Surtees and Ickx with his Ferrari. Unconscious in the flames, Regazzoni owed his survival to Mike Helwood's courage. He threw his hands into the furnace to pull him out and save his life. Unmoved by the yellow flags being waved around the site of the drama, Stewart makes the most of the situation to overtake everyone and go into the lead in the 7th lap. Well, a complaint was lodged by McLaren, but the dual world champion in 69 and 71 only received a warning. Different times, different morals perhaps. As a result, Stewart went on to completely unhoped-for victory. Fittipaldi could do nothing. Worse still, the Brazilian was having to battle with Revson, Nazario, Hume and Peterson. Who could guess the outcome of this battle for the podium? Francois Sever has had to stop several times. He's 4 laps behind the leader. The winner was none other than Jackie Stewart. Despite having started from 14th place on the grid, he certainly had something to thank the yellow flags for. Well, there was then an 8-week break before the next race, the first in Europe, in Spain. The Grand Prix took place at Barcelona, on the hill at Mountwich. The circuit, 3.8 kilometres long, 75 laps ahead. Amongst the new features, the Brabham BT42, owned by Gordon Murray. The Ferraris were as transparent as ever. Clay Regazzoni was present. His accident at Kyalami, nothing more than a bad memory, it seems. Practice sessions then around this hilly and sinuous course. Hard both on tyres and brakes. Peterson really went for it. Took pole, 0.7 of a second ahead of Hume. 2 seconds over his teammate Fittipaldi, leader of the World Championship. At the start, the Swedish driver hangs on to his advantage over the rest of the pack. Little by little, Peterson increases his lead. Stewart overtook Hume for second place. The battle for third place was now between Hume, Severe and Fittipaldi. Hume, however, soon had to stop and change his tyre, followed shortly by Severe. The latter lost a lap while he was at it, having started just in front of his teammate, Stewart. This was when Peterson began to have a few problems. During the 57th lap, he had to stop in the pits with a broken gearbox. Before that, Stewart had to abandon too, let down by his brakes. It was drama after drama, and in the end, Fittipaldi won in front of Severe. Fulmer in the shadow came third, Revson fourth, Beltoise fifth, Hume in sixth. Fittipaldi could consider himself lucky. Despite having a slow puncture during the last 20 laps, his Lotus hung on until the end, giving Colin Chapman his 50th Grand Prix win and the third in 4 Grand Prix so far in the 1973 season. We next see Francois Severe on track at Zolder, the theatre both for the Belgium and European Grand Prix on the 20th of May. Well, that year the Frenchman had clearly gone up a level. Although he still lacked the success that sometimes makes world champions, he's definitely up at Stewart's level in terms of pure performance. Yes, in fact, in the qualifying session, Severe gets in front of the Scotsman, although once again, it was Peterson that took pole, 0.6 in front of Hume. So it was Pedersen and Severe that led the dance to begin with. As early as the second lap, though, a surprise. Severe in the lead. Better than that, the Tyrrell driver was getting away at a rate of at least a second a lap. Peterson held the pack, amongst them Fittipaldi and Stewart. they relatively far back. Severe's control of the Belgian Grand Prix, total for the moment at least. Suddenly, Ickx and his Ferrari had to abandon. A broken oil pump made him stop on the edge of the track. After 10 laps, Severe was still in the lead with 9 seconds lead over Pedersen. Stewart and Fittipaldi were waiting in the wings, and in the 19th lap, they both overtake Pedersen. Following lap, Severe spun off the track. He succeeded in getting started again, climbing back up the places and regaining second place. Needless to say, others had made the most of the incident, and when it came to playing the tactics of prudence and clairvoyance, one person was better than all the rest: Jackie Stewart. The Scotsman took his second victory of the season, relegating Fittipaldi third, 2 minutes behind him. Magnificent double for the Elf Tyrrell Ford team, and a new lesson in optimism from Jackie Stewart. The next meeting, well, the classic amongst classics, Monaco. As ever, a glamorous atmosphere, strained for this race though, unlike any other. At Tyrrell, they've equipped their cars with Lockheed brakes instead of the usual Girlings, so as to avoid the overheating problems suffered in Spain and Belgium. Jackie Stewart took pole, 2/10 in front of Pedersen. Severe took fourth.
Return to Grand Prix racing with the Brook Bond Oxo Surtees Fina TS14A.
The Frenchman then got off to a dreamlike start, shooting past all 3 cars in front of him. A catastrophic start, on the other hand, for Stewart, who could do no better than fourth by the end of the first lap. As usual, the duel was between the Tyrrells and the Lotuses. Alas, right at the start, Severe hit a pavement and has to give up any hope of victory. Stewart alone against the black cars driven by Fittipaldi and Pedersen. It took more than that to trouble him, and soon, beneath the gaze of Nora Tyrrell, who came to every Grand Prix, the Scotsman went on to win once again. Severe was a long way back but didn't give up. His desire for revenge after his error took him to fourth place. During this Grand Prix, 2 young drivers showed their talent. Niki Lauda running at third at one point, and James Hunt, who was competing in his first Grand Prix, running 6th at one time. Both abandoned, but they showed that their names were worth watching. the front. It was the 25th Grand Prix victory for Jackie Stewart, who joined Jim Clark in history and Emerson Fittipaldi at the top of the World Championship table. 3 Grand Prix victories each out of 6 races this year. Not bad. Well, just like Brazil at the beginning of the season, another country also had the honour of welcoming the Formula 1 Grand Prix for the first time, Sweden. The Anderstorp circuit, 3.018 kilometres long, 80 laps on the programme. Needless to say, the crowd's favourite was Ronnie Peterson. No longer needs to prove his velocity. Been dogged by bad luck, though, since the beginning of the year. Maybe that would change. And Peterson gave no one else a chance of taking pole. 8 hundredths in front of Sever. Stewart on the second row next to Fittipaldi. So everything's set up for a superb Grand Prix. The weather was pleasant, the crowd numerous, and there were 3 Frenchmen in the line, as there had been since the first Grand Prix of the year. Sever and the 2 Jean-Pierres, Beltoise and Jarier, the latter at the wheel of a March Ford. An impeccable start for the 2 Lotuses, which were in front of the 2 Tyrrells. Fittipaldi putting pressure on Peterson, who resisted. 2 groups have now formed themselves: Peterson, Fittipaldi, Sever and Stewart. The battle's being fought out between the teams. On the 33rd lap, handicapped by his brakes, Sever is overtaken by Stewart. 10 laps from the finish, Stewart took second place from Fittipaldi, whose Lotus starting to smoke. Dennis Hume just behind him, Sever 5th. Pedersen still had to complete 5 laps to make his first Grand Prix victory. The Swede was being hassled by Stewart and Hume. 4 laps from the finish, another piece of drama. Stewart had gone following a brake disc problem. The Scots had slowed down considerably, only just managing to hang on to a rather dismal 5th place at the finish. And that wasn't all. 3 laps from the end, Fittipaldi had to stop with gearbox trouble. Lastly, in the 79th lap, very painfully, Pedersen had to let Hume pass. The New Zealander, the crowd's enormous disappointment, taking victory. First of July 1973, the Paul Ricard circuit at Le Castellet. The French Grand Prix getting ready to conclude the first half of the season. Emerson Fittipaldi was still at the head of the championship, but only had a 2-point lead over Stewart. The Brazilian set off from 3rd place on the grid. Note that a new car had appeared. The Ensign with Ricky Van Opel at the wheel. Graham Hill still there despite his 43 years. He was driving a modest Shadow Ford Embassy. Well, the young Jody Scheckter caused a stir in the warm-ups by taking second best time, but Stewart was the undisputable owner of pole. He was the only one to get below 1 minute 49. So the the green light shows 54 laps were planned. Very hot, the tyres, the mechanics, everyone were going to suffer. Scheckter immediately went into the lead. Jackie Oliver in the shadow, broke his gearbox though. Under Stewart's eyes, Pedersen attacked Scheckter. The South African, though, was resisting. Sever, well, he dropped back from the leaders into 6th place. Coming up to mid-race, Scheckter still leading. Pedersen couldn't find an opening. Stewart seemed to be biding his time, though. Fittipaldi didn't take long to come up closer, and the feeling that the situation was going to resolve itself was palpable. Five of them, wheel against wheel, the suspense enormous. At the mid-race point, Stewart was no longer there. He stopped to change a wheel. And while that was happening, Fittipaldi overtook Pedersen. The 42nd lap, the turning point of the race. While trying to overtake Beltoise, Fittipaldi and Scheckter hit each other. The Brazilian abandoned with broken suspension. Yes, Stewart was on the move, at 5th place at this point, finally coming home 4th, which meant that he went into the lead in the championship. But the man of the race was Ronnie Peterson. This time the Swede had done it, taking great revenge for the Swedish Grand Prix. In his 40th race, Peterson won. Francois Sever came second for the 4th time in 8 races. Peterson-Sever on the podium, while neither Stewart nor Fittipaldi were to be seen. It gave some idea of the intensity of the duel between Lotus and Tyrrell during 1973. On the 14th of July, it was the British Grand Prix. Sever still hoping, no doubt, to win his first victory of the year, the one he'd been after for almost 2 years. But for Colin Chapman and the Lotuses, the important thing was to keep on going the way they had at Le Castellet and let Fittipaldi continue his fight with Stewart. Well, the Scotsman was almost playing on home ground, but the competition was tough on the Silverstone circuit, where Pedersen took pole once again. At the start, everything went well. Stewart took the lead in front of Pedersen, Reutemann and Scheckter. Well, it was here that the latter decided to skid off at the entry to the final straight. The rest can only be called a perfect illustration of a particular kind of chaos. A monumental pile-up was the result. A dozen cars were involved. Andra de Adamic suffering a broken ankle. Apart from Scheckter and de Adamic, Hailwood, Pace, Mass, Beltoise, Williamson and Fulmer were eliminated. An hour and a half later, a new start. Only 19 left on the grid. This time Peterson didn't let Stewart take him by surprise and took the lead with authority. Stewart, though, attacking the Lotus driver and committing one of the rare errors in his career. At the Stowe turn, the Tyrrell spins. Rejoins the race in 13th place. In the 39th lap, change of leader. Peter Revson has got the better of Peterson. James Hunt, the beginner, parading in 3rd place. In the end, the American keeps his advantage and achieves his first Grand Prix victory in his career. Peterson 2nd, Hume 3rd, Hunt finally 4th, Sever 5th. Neither Fittipaldi, who abandoned, nor Stewart 10th make any points. The following round took place in Holland on the Zandvoort circuit. The Ferrari wasn't there. The Commendatore, unhappy with the performance of the cars, had decided to give the race a miss. The weather was appalling to begin with, which did nothing to stop Peterson from signing his 6th pole of the season in 10 Grand Prix. His teammate Fittipaldi was injured during the warm-ups. He was in great pain with his ankle. And the young Lauda in a BRM in 11th place on the grid. Lotuses, the beginning of the race was something of a paradox. Pedersen set off flat out and led the dance, while Fittipaldi was too handicapped by his injury. He stopped and gave up on the 2nd lap. Stewart and Sever were trying to ambush one another, which was when the drama happened during the 8th lap. Roger Williamson came out of a fast corner, hit the safety rail, overturned, slid upside down, the car caught fire. The emergency services took 8 minutes to arrive, an eternity. It meant Williamson burned in his car. At the mid-race point, Peterson had more than 10 seconds advance over the Stewart-Sever duo. The Swede was masterly once again. He was regretting the bad start he'd had to the season. Without that, he would have been able to try for the World Championship crown, but he was too far behind to maintain any such hopes. Behind the 3 leaders, James Hunt was once again in evidence. The Englishman was at the wheel of the March Ford, went on to collect his first podium of his career. In front of him, Pedersen was unfortunately having a few problems. Brake problems. Classic script that seems to repeat itself. The Swede could dominate all he liked, but he could never be sure of the outcome. As it was, slowly but surely, he lost his lead, and only 6 laps from the finish, has to stop in the pits and abandon with a broken gearbox. From then on, the Tyrrells had the race won and made it a double. On the podium, Stewart was thinking about Roger Williamson's death and began to talk about his retirement. Although he just won his 26th Grand Prix victory, no one had ever reached a score like it. And so to the German Grand Prix, which took place at the Nürburgring on the legendary 22.835 kilometre circuit. Stewart was trying to manage his lead in the championship, but that was no reason to do too much before qualifying. Stewart took pole, half a second faster than Peterson, while Sever was 3rd. The Ferraris still absent, but Jackie Ickx had found refuge with McLaren and took an excellent 4th time on his favourite circuit. For Fittipaldi, there was no question of faffing around. He had to hit hard if he wanted to conserve a chance of the title. Tyrrell's off to a great start, helped by Pedersen's early abandonment on the first lap. Yes, a first lap that looked more like a stroll for the blue cars. Fittipaldi had fuel feed problems. It wasn't the day for Lotus. In his McLaren, Ickx had a perfect drive. He was third. He could do no better. The Tyrrells, they were out of reach. Halfway through the race, behind the leading three, Reutemann, Pace and Hume, Fittipaldi fighting it out with his brother Wilson for 7th place. At the finish, 1.6 seconds separated the two Elf Tyrrell Ford teammates. A second consecutive victory, 5th in the season. Stewart was practically certain of the title. It was also to be his 27th and last Grand Prix victory. So to the Austrian Grand Prix, which took place at the Zeltweg circuit, almost 6 kilometres long. The question was whether Francois Cevert was to be the strong man at the end of the season. It was clear that Stewart was ready to help the young teammate. He'd taken him under his wing. They had a very close relationship, and their times were very close as well. Very fast, this circuit in Austria, very demanding on the brakes. Everyone wanted to see what Lotus would do. Fittipaldi remains stuck in a black run of luck. Only 1 point from the last 5 Grand Prix. Obviously not worthy of a champion in waiting. Well, it didn't stop the Brazilian from taking pole in front of Pedersen, but it was the latter who started the best. What was worse for Fittipaldi was that Hume had succeeded in slipping in between the two Lotuses. Despite that, on the 15th lap, Fittipaldi got into 2nd place. Cevert unfortunately had to abandon after a collision with Arturo Mazzario in the Ferrari. Yes, Ferrari back after an absence of 2 Grand Prix. Stewart running 3rd. On the 25th lap, Fittipaldi had made it to the lead. The Brazilian was obviously out for revenge. And on this magnificent circuit, the spectacle was superb. Sadly, though, for him, 5 laps from the finish, Fittipaldi has to abandon. The pipe linking the petrol pump and the distributor came off. For once, it was Pedersen who inherited victory and took his 2nd Grand Prix success in front of Stewart. The title was coming closer. Perhaps it would be his at Monza. Carlos Pace was 3rd, Reutemann 4th, Beltoise 5th, Regazzoni 6th. On the 9th of September, it was off to Italy in the 13th round of the championship. We first saw the drivers on their feet. Yes, the race had been organised around the circuit before the cars got involved. Well, Stewart almost seemed to be struggling. Far in front, a certain Frank Williams was much faster, setting a great rhythm and winning this particular race. Yes, an image full of significance when we know what the future held for this particular Englishman. No surprises in practice. Inevitable, perhaps. Ronnie Peterson took pole, Revson putting his McLaren on the first line. The Ferraris on home ground started with two cars, one for Ickx, one for Mazzario. James Hunt, well, he was injured during the practice and was unable to take part in the race. Stewart only made 6th time, Sever 11th. In the race itself, it was Peterson who got off to the best starts. Mazzario broke his suspension during the second lap. Jackie Stewart had to stop and change a punctured tyre. Hume did the same to check his suspension after a spin. Both now a long way back. On the 30th lap, Peterson still leading in front of Fittipaldi and Revson. Stewart managed to climb back up to 4th place. That would be enough to allow him to claim the title 2 races before the end of the season. But for that, Fittipaldi had not to win this Italian Grand Prix, which was exactly what happened. Peterson didn't let his teammate past, took his 3rd victory of the season. The Swede was definitely the strong man of the second half of the season, but the man of the race, Jackie Stewart, took his 3rd World Championship title after those 1969 and 1971 victories. By then it was almost official that the Scotsman would announce his retirement after the last Grand Prix of the year in America. Before that, there was the Canadian Grand Prix on the tough Mosport circuit, where the track was almost 4 kilometres long. But Lotus, despite having lost the title, were still smiling and kept their sense of humour. Pole position was to belong to Peterson, but it was to rain on race day from dawn onwards. Since the rain continued, the start was delayed. The track remained wet and very trappy. Everyone seemed to be skidding and spinning. The race was to start with Peterson on pole, who finished almost a second in front of Revson. Yet another demonstration from the Swede, despite his exit from the track. So everyone would be holding their breath before the start. All the drivers had rain tyres. The beginning of the race was marked by Niki Lauda's domination with his BRM. The Austrian literally flew around the track that was beginning to dry. Unfortunately for Lauda, though, his team made a mistake with the tyres at his pit stop, and he lost all hope of being able to take his first victory. Stewart was also having problems with his tyres that were getting too hot. Soon everyone had to stop because the weather conditions improved dramatically. They were all in and out of the pits, the placings becoming a real nightmare for the timekeepers. One thing was certain, Peterson didn't have it in the bag yet. After a puncture, he hit a safety barrier. Severe collided with Scheckter. Both men had to retire. Worse, the Frenchman had 2 twisted ankles. As a result, and since the debris of the Tyrrell was all over the track, the race managers decided to send out the safety car, which at that stage was still called the official race neutralizing car. When the car set off again, no one knew exactly what the placings were. The battle seemed to be between the 2 jackies, Oliver and Stewart, along with Fittipaldi. In fact, emerging out of all the confusion, it was Peter Revson who won and took his second victory of the year. Fittipaldi was second, more than 30 seconds away. Oliver third, Beltoise fourth, Stewart fifth, and Ganley sixth. The last Grand Prix of the year took place in the United States on the Watkins Glen circuit. It was the beginning of October 1973, and it's true to say that there wasn't much to play for. The Grand Prix was marked forever by the loss of Francois Cevert. The Frenchman died during practice, ironically on the circuit where he'd won his only Grand Prix victory 2 years earlier. The small world of Formula One was in shock. Francois, loved for his charm, his kindness and his talent, was gone. Even beyond the sport, the loss of Cevert was felt throughout France when the news reached Europe. Many people still remember having cried for the loss of this little prince of speed, gone forever. Well, Jackie Stewart, Ken Tyrrell and all the team members were devastated. The Scotsman should have been taking part in his 100th and last Grand Prix. He decided to withdraw as a sign of respect. The rest, well, purely anecdotal. No one's heart was in it. They all set off for 59 laps, and no surprise when Peterson took the lead in front of Reutemann. Ganley, well, he stopped during the 12th lap to have his suspension checked. On the 20th lap, Peterson leads in front of Hunt, Reutemann, Hume and Scheckter. Fittipaldi was having problems with his road holding. James Hunt put Peterson under terrible pressure. The Swede resisted valiantly in the face of this wild young Englishman. Pace, Hailwood, Mass, Lauda and Scheckter were all to abandon though. Fittipaldi was leading the South African when the latter came off the track. He was only able to avoid him by braking desperately. Those tyres were immediately destroyed, or almost. He stopped to change them and lost a place to Revson. The placings remained stable until the finish. Peterson took his 4th victory of the year, 7/10 in front of Hunt, Reutemann 3rd, Hume 4th, Revson 5th, Fittipaldi 6th. So the 7th success in the year for Lotus, against 5 for Tyrrell. As a result, it was Colin Chapman's stable that took the International Manufacturers' Cup with 92 points, 10 ahead of their rival. Ferrari only 6th with just 12 miserable points. In the drivers' placings, Stewart won with 71 points, Fittipaldi was second with 55 points, Peterson third with 52, Francois Sever was fourth with 47. The new triple world champion, holder of the record number of Grand Prix victories, retiring. Jackie Stewart, gone in pain and sadness at the loss of his friend. That was 1973. From me, Carlton Kirby, it's bye-bye.